growing up in New York, Doug can tell you, when you were taking a subway someplace, you spent a lot of time on a station platform, you were cold. It didn't matter where you were going. You were cold.
All right, let's get started. So tonight, Parshas Vayetze. This is one of my favorite parshas, I think. I maybe in the book of Bereshit, this is my favorite, Parshas Vayetze. So we're in the midst of Yaakov's story, and we actually are going to see from the story of Yaakov a fascinating insight into daily prayer. That's what tonight's topic is going to be about. It's about the mitzvah of daily prayer and where the source for prayer comes from according to various opinions, some of the laws of prayer, the difference between the various prayers that we say throughout the day, and then, as typical to this class, we'll ask a series of questions, and once we have the answer, we have like a whole new approach to life, right? We are going to walk out of here different people. So, I think one of the reasons Parshas Vayetze is one of my favorite is because Italian and I were talking before class. This is the Shabbos of my son's birth, my first son, Zalman. He's a Parshas Vayetze baby, and so he had his 14th birthday this week. And so I've been like mentally preparing for Bar Mitzvah, which was last year, for 13 years, and thinking about Parshas Vayetze. So I think
it's been a year since his Bar Mitzvah.
Yeah, that year. Yeah, this week is a year since his Bar Mitzvah. And so, it has personal importance to me as well, Parshas Vayetze. So let's get right into it. Now, as a quick recap of where we're up to right now in Parshas Vayetze. Vayetze means to go out. Yaakov is going out. Vayetze Yaakov mi Beersheva. He's going out of Beersheva, going out of the land of Israel, where his family lives. Why is he going out? There's turmoil. There's family struggle. If you remember from the end of last week's Parsha, Yaakov tricked his father, Yitzchak, into giving him the blessing that Yitzchak intended to give to Esav. And when Esav becomes aware of this scheme of where Yaakov took the blessing, Esav is enraged. Now, Esav vows at the end of last week's Parsha, as soon as our parents are out of this picture, I'm going to kill you. That's what kind of turmoil we're talking about here. And Esav is not one to, that's not an idle threat when we're talking about Esav. Esav is a murderer, he's a hunter, he's got a lot of bad deeds on his record, so a threat like that from Esav is a real threat. Now, and then we're in this moment where Yaakov is leaving one set of turmoil and getting into another. Because his father-in-law-to-be, when he goes, and we're going to see from this week's Parsha, Lavan is no easy character to deal with either. So Yaakov is in a real state of transition. That's where we're at in this story. So what we're going to see from the beginning of this week's Parsha is sort of like an insight, a moment in the narrative, which tells us how to deal with such trouble, which shows us what's the proper response, the proper approach to such difficulty, such transition in life. All right, so that's the first text for tonight. So in the very beginning of this week's Torah portion, Parshas Vayetze, it has, this is the English translation of Vayetze Yaakov mi Beersheva. Yaakov left Beersheva, and he went to Haran. That's the opening verse. The second verse of this week's Torah portion reads, and he arrived at the place and lodged there because the sun had set. And he took some of the stones of the place and placed them at his head, and he lay down in that place. Now the word that we want to pay particular attention to is the word arrived. And the second sentence says, and he arrived. So the Hebrew for and he arrived is vayifga. Like vayifga is the key word here. The word for arrived, vayifga, is an unusual type of word. It's not something which you see a lot used throughout the Chumash, used throughout the 5 books of Moses. And here it's translated in English as arrived, but it could also mean that he encountered, He encountered the place, which is also a strange kind of term. What does it mean he encountered the place? Now, a third meaning, which Rashi points out, is that it's a third meaning, which is that it's referring to prayer. The Vayifka, as this unusual expression, which can be translated as arrived, it can be translated as encountered, could also, though, have another entirely different layer of meaning, which we see from Rashi. So the highlighted word, and he arrived, that's the translation of Vayifka. So Rashi takes that word and explains what it means. It says the Hebrew word Vayifka, as in it reached Ufaga Jericho. So that's the encounter, that's the reaching, that's the arriving. And it reached Ufaga Dabashes. Now, that's where we have arrived, encountered. We see other places throughout the Tanakh, the book of Joshua, and these two verses. This is right after Moshe passes away and the Jewish people go in to conquer the land of Israel. These places, encountering the places, this is talking in the book of Joshua. So then Rashi gives us this third explanation, this third meaning, that alternatively, our rabbis interpreted the word Vayifka as an expression of prayer. As in, do not entreat me, do not tifka me, which is from the book of Jeremiah, the Yirmiyahu. So it's do not pray to me. So this teaches us from the same expression, the same word, that what's going on over here is that Yaakov, in this moment, instituted the evening prayer. So from Rashi's explaining, from the book of Yirmiyahu, from the book of Jeremiah, where we have this expression, Vayifka, the same root of Vayifka, this expression is used in the book of Jeremiah to denote prayer. So based on that similar expression and based on a different context where it means prayer, here what Yaakov is doing when he gets to the place is he's stopping to pray. He's offering a prayer to God. And from this prayer that Yaakov is offering, he is the first in history. He's the initiator of the evening prayer service. So we're thousands of years later, we're born into a Jewish tradition. We're born into how Jews pray, and we maybe weren't ourselves born into it necessarily, but once we get familiar with it, this is just how it is. We don't know anything else. But Yaakov, what they're telling us is this moment, he's starting something brand new. And that's the topic for tonight. The topic for tonight is the topic of prayer, and to understand where it comes from, how it works, what are some of the themes of prayer, how it's developed through time, and then we'll try to analyze through a series of questions and answers what the mitzvah of prayer, particularly the evening prayer, has to teach us. What does this encounter have to teach us? Now, as an aside, not for tonight's topic, the text and the subject won't go this way, but our rabbis tell us that when Yaakov has this encounter in this place, what does he then do after praying? He falls asleep. Mm-hmm. Right? And this is the famous Jacob's ladder. So the rabbis tell us that Jacob's ladder is in fact an imagery for prayer. When it says that the angels were going up and coming down the ladder, this is the movement of prayer. This is the dynamic of prayer. The prayers go up, the prayers come down. We pray to God, and there's an answer. There's rungs on the ladder, which represent the various stages of prayer that we go one higher and higher and higher after the next. So this is a rich topic in this week's parsha. And one of the reasons my favorite is this very image of the ladder and how it has to do with prayer. That's tonight's topic, is prayer. Now, so when we see here in Rashi that Yaakov is credited with being the innovator, the one who brought the evening prayer into the world, what we're going to see from the next text, though, is that Yaakov is not the innovator of prayer. And in fact, this is the third prayer in a series which started with Abraham. Then you have Abraham, and then Yitzchak, and then Yaakov, and there's a 3-part development in the whole notion of prayer. So you have, who are the 3 steps? The morning prayers, Shacharis we call it, that's from Abraham. The afternoon prayers, Mincha, that's from Yitzchak. And then, like we just said from the previous text, from Rashi, the evening services, Mariv, that is from Yaakov. Now, we'll see where this comes from. Okay, so
Go back to the last one. So, as I recall, Yaakov was, rather Yitzchak, when he was seen for the first time, I guess he was seen in the fields.
Yeah.
And in the afternoon, so that's where that sort of came from.
Yeah.
And it's sort of like the same sort of thing, that he sort of arrived in the fields.
Right.
Where he was in the fields, and the location had something to do with the prayer.
That's right.
I'm assuming there's some connection.
Right, and you see Rashi pointed out there as well.
Right.
Point out that this sicha that he's saying in the field, this meditation, is prayer. Exactly. Yeah, so very good. Now, the next text 2a, just a tiny little screen. So those that are at home can put your nose up against the screen to read the letters. And from here, the printout, you maybe get a better view close up from the printout. But this is from the tractate in the Talmud, which is dedicated to this whole topic of prayer. We have a tractate called Brachos, prayers, and it is dedicated to this whole mitzvah of prayer. So this next text comes from Talmud Tractate Brachos, and it's going to give us the origins of the 3 daily prayers and how we find them as the product or the innovations of our patriarchs, Abraham, Yitzchak, and Yaakov. All right, let's see how the English translation reads. So it has been stated, Rabbi Yossi, son of Rabbi Chanina, said, the prayers were instituted by the Avos. They were instituted by the patriarchs. Now, I want you to keep in mind a few things over here. First of all, this statement, we're going to soon see, is not without controversy. That when we say that the three daily prayers are from the patriarchs, that's not going to be taken lightly by all opinions, So it will be contested. Now, I also want you to pay close attention as we go through the Talmudic text as to the names of the disputants. So here we have Rabbi Yossi, the son of Rabbi Chanina. And he asserts that the prayers were instituted by the patriarchs. And he's going to give us his proofs. It has been taught, in accordance with Rabbi Yossi ben Chanina, that Abraham instituted the morning prayer. And how do we know this? What's the proof? He brings it from a verse in the Torah. As it is stated, Abraham got up early in the morning to the place where he had stood. So, this biblical exegesis, he says the word for standing, the word for stood, standing means prayer. And how do we know that? Because it is said, then Pinchas stood up and prayed. So from the story of Pinchas later in the book of Bamidbar, when he stands up and prays, that teaches us that standing means prayer. So when Abraham stands up, that means Abraham is praying. Now, paying close attention to when it happened, Abraham got up early in the morning. So Abraham is the one who instituted morning prayer. So the Talmud continues, Yitzchak, Isaac, instituted the afternoon prayer. Again, we have biblical verses as the source for this. As it is stated, and Yitzchak went out to meditate in the field at eventide, at evening. So the word for meditate there in the verse is sicha. Meditation, sicha, means prayer. As it is stated, a prayer of the afflicted when he faints and pours out his complaint, pours out his sicha before God. So we see the way this is working in Talmud. Talmud, you have Abraham, Yitzchak, and Yaakov. You have certain times of the day, Abraham in the morning, Yitzchak in the day, and then we see one verse in the story, on the narrative, one word there, which if we find that same word somewhere else in Tanakh, in the Bible, then in the other context, it's more explicit that it's prayer. So when the other context explicitly describes this word as referring to prayer, then now we know what Abraham and Yitzchak are doing. So the same thing for Yaakov. The Talmud continues. Yaakov instituted the evening prayer, as it is stated, and he arrived, vayifka, paga, upon the place, and tarried there all night. Arrived, this is like what Rashi said. Arrived means prayer. As it is stated, therefore, pray not for you this people, neither lift up or cry, nor prayer for them. Neither make intercession, paga, to me. That's the source from Jeremiah, and it's greater length. So we have, again, this is three times, Abraham, Yitzchak, Yaakov, morning, noon, and night. Three different expressions where if we look and find these expressions other places, they're all explicitly referring to prayer. So we can derive from that in this context, it's also teaching us about prayer. All right, so that's on the table. That's what we have so far. Now, I told you that this is not, that there's going to be a dispute. This is where things get a little complicated. So the complication is like this. There are other opinions as to what exactly is the source for the way we pray. We pray 3 times a day. We pray morning, noon, and night. Morning, afternoon, and night. So where does all this come from? So one opinion, which we've now read out and learned, is that it comes from the Avos, comes from the verses in the book of Genesis. Another opinion is that it's not just from the Avos, it's from the sacrifices. That rather than using this like biblical exegesis to learn out the source for prayer, instead we have a mitzvah of sacrifices in the temple, and the sacrifices in the temple is the source for daily prayer. That's the other side of the argument. Now, where the Avos, the patriarchs, are the source, according to Rabbi Yossi, that was learned out from shared expressions in the verses. The opinion that sacrifices are the source for prayer is learned out from the times of the prayers. Meaning, we have a certain fixed time for when we pray, and these fixed times are parallel to the fixed times for the sacrifices in the temple. Meaning, because we have prescribed times when it starts and when it stops the window to pray, and that start and stop is exactly the same window of when the sacrifices are offered. So from that we can deduce that the source for prayer, the basis for prayer, is from the sacrifices. That's what the next text, also from Tractate Talmud Brachos, or Talmud Tractate Brachos, is text 2b. Here, again, this is the name that's more you should like highlight or really have in your mind. Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi says the prayers were instituted to replace the daily sacrifices. Now it has been taught, and also in accordance with Yeshua ben Levi. Why did they say that the morning prayer could be said till midday? Because the regular morning sacrifice could be brought up to midday. So we talk about the carbon tomid, the sacrifice, which was a continual offering. So it was offered every morning, and it could be offered until midday, and that's why you can pray the morning services until midday. The Talmud continues, and why did they say that the afternoon prayer can be said up until the evening? Because the regular afternoon offering, the carbon tomid, can also be brought up to the evening. And why did they say that for the evening prayer there is no limit, meaning you have the whole night? Because the limbs and the fats that were not consumed on the altar by the evening could be offered the entire night. Right? You're kind of clearing out the system of the daily sacrifices. You have all night to burn before you start another day of sacrificial order. That's why Marav could go all night. And why did they say that the additional prayers, the Musaf prayers, could be said throughout the entire day because the Musaf offering could be brought during the whole day. So what we see from text 2a and text 2b, both taken from the same source in the Gemara Brachos, is that there are two traditions. There are two, let's call them for now, competing traditions for the origin of our prayer, the way we pray today. Each has its own set of evidence. One is biblical exegesis, the other is parallel frame work and times for the prayers. And so now we have these two opinions, and we have to kind of figure out why do we need both, or what's the difference between the two opinions. All right, here's a quick book recommendation. There's a concept called integrative thinking. A lot of times like a mental shortcut that we have, which is a lot of times unnecessary, is we take two things, two options, and we think of them as either or, right? We have two ways. It could, like in this case, it's the avos, the patriarchs, or it's the sacrifices. One of those two, right? Yossi and the other opinions is like, which one is it exactly? And Yeshua, that's what the name I was looking for. Rabbi Yossi, Rabbi Yeshua, so it's either Rabbi Yossi's right or Rabbi Yeshua's right. We have to work it out, which one's right, either or. Integrative thinking is where it can be both. There's a great book, I highly recommend it. It's called The Opposable Mind, right? So the idea, so the opposable mind is based off the concept of the opposable thumb. The big breakthrough in human development is that we have this opposable thumb that allows us to fashion tools. And by taking, opposite directions, the hand and the thumb, we can make tools, and from there we took off, and we are doing great things like making computers we were talking about before. We've done tremendous things since then, the opposable thumb. So the same idea of the book is that rather than think like it's either or, if you can integrate your options as a business person, as a manager, as someone facing different complicated problems, instead of being trapped in thinking of either or, if you could say both, then that's how you come up with the best solutions. So it's called The Opposable Mind. Roger Martin wrote the book. It's a great book. I think I have recommended it in the past. So if you haven't taken the recommendation up yet, it's a good read. Now, so which one is it? Is it Yossi? Is it Yeshua? Or is it both? How do we understand what's going on over here? So let's see some attempts at resolution to what appears to be an argument between Rabbi Yossi and Rabbi Yeshua. The Gemara continues there in Talmud Tractate Brachos. It says, shall we say, what Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi just said, is a refutation? Is he arguing with Rabbi Yossi ben Chanina? So Rabbi Yossi ben Chanina, the first opinion is that we pray according to the patterns established by the patriarchs. He could answer, I could still maintain that the patriarchs instituted the prayers, but that the rabbis found the basis for them in the offerings. For if you do not assume, meaning both, if you do not assume this, who, according to Rabbi Yossi ben Chanina, instituted the additional Musaf offering? See, what we had with Rabbi second opinion, Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi, is he did Shacharis, Mincha, Mariv, and Musaf. So if we're going to say that you need a biblical character and a story with a word that explicitly somewhere else says it's prayer, we don't have a forefather, So where does Musaf come from? That's the problem the Gemara brings up. They must maintain, therefore, that the patriarchs instituted the prayers as a concept, but that the rabbi found the basis for them in the sacrifices, in the offerings. So here's a proposed synthesis of the two traditions. Rabbi Yossi's is preserved this way, with the forefathers being the beginners, but then the rabbis finding a framework, finding a basis for how we pray in a different source, which is in the sacrifices. Now, the next text we're going to see is where Maimonides also tries to resolve in an integrative way this seeming argument. This is what seems to be an argument over what you can only have one source for a mitzvah, right? So we're going to see how Maimonides tries to resolve this as well. All right, so this is from the Mishnah Torah, the Laws of Kings, the 9th chapter over there. The first halacha, Maimonides explains. 6 precepts were commanded to Adam. The first is the prohibition against worship of false gods. The second is the prohibition against cursing God. The third is the prohibition against murder. The fourth is the prohibition against incest and adultery. The fifth is the prohibition against theft. The command to establish, the sixth is the command to establish laws and courts of justice. So you have the 6 universal laws of man that were all given straight to Adam. The 7th is a prohibition against eating flesh from a living animal that was added in the time of Noah. So thus, between what we have for Adam, the first 6, and what we have for Noah, the 7th, we have what are called the Sheva Mitzvahs B'nai Noach, 7 mitzvahs for all mankind. Now these matters, these are divine decrees for every single person. These matters remain the same throughout the world until Abraham. Abraham came and added, so to say, to the divine decrees for man. When Abraham arose, in addition to these, he was commanded regarding circumcision, said the mitzvah of bris milah. And, Maimonides points out, he also established the morning prayers. Yitzchak separated tithes, he gave Meiser, which we read in last week's Torah portion, and established an additional prayer service before sunset, Mincha. Yaakov added the prohibition against eating the sciatic nerve, right? That's going to be next week's parsha when he has this whole wrestling match with the angel. And he also established the evening prayers, Mariv. And then continues, in Egypt, Amram was commanded regarding other mitzvahs, and ultimately Moses came and the Torah was completed by him, all the 613 commandments. So according to Maimonides in the Laws of Kings, we have what he's giving us is this historical buildup from the universal code of 7 laws for all mankind, and how it goes step by step until after Moses we have 613 commandments, the revelation of the Torah on Mount Sinai. Now, but what we see along the way in this development is Maimonides seems to side with the first opinion in our Gemara, our first opinion in Tractate Brachos, that it's the forefathers who were the originators of the 3 daily prayers, right? Now, the next text is the very same Maimonides in the same work, the Mishnah Torah, but here in a whole different set of laws, more topical for tonight's discussion, the laws of prayer. So in the first chapter, Laws of Prayer, the 5th and 6th halacha there, Maimonides explains about prayer, that they decreed that the number of prayers correspond to what? The number of sacrifices. The prayer that corresponds to the daily morning sacrifices is called Shacharis. The prayer that corresponds to the daily sacrifice offered in the afternoon is called Mincha. And the prayer corresponding to additional offerings is called Musaf. They also instituted a prayer to be recited at night, since the limbs of the daily afternoon offering could be burned the whole night, as the verse states, the burnt offering shall remain on the altar hearth all night until morning. So Maimonides, in the Laws of Prayer, it brings the second opinion of Yeshua ben Levi. So the Rambam seems to adopt this integrative approach from text 2c. That we have Rabbi Yossi, and Rabbi Yeshua, that we have the forefathers are the innovators, and the framework as far as the time and everything, like when we're supposed to pray, that is a mirror of the sacrifices. All right, so we have this integrative approach with the Talmud, and Maimonides adopts it. So now, here's the question: if you have this is why either or thinking is so appealing. If you have an option to have just one answer, but then integrative thinking gives you both. You have both together. So then the question that the either-or mind asks the integrative thinker is, well, why do you need both? Like, why isn't one answer sufficient? Let's keep things simple, right? Just give me one answer. A deeper way of saying that question is that, what do we gain by having the second opinion?
Especially if you don't seem to gain anything if they get the same result, that it's something that occurs that time of day, why have two?
Right, exactly. You know, and this is where you get like your head spinning when you learn Gemara. Like when you hear two opinions, you say, well, what is missing from the first opinion that is filled in by the second opinion? And the other way around. What's missing from the second opinion that you need the first opinion for? So why do we need both? That's a simple way of asking this question. Why do we need both if we have the patriarchs? Why do we need sacrifices? So the next slide we're going to see is the Ritzvah.
May I ask a question?
Sure.
Do we know which came first? I know with Cain and Abel, they offered sacrifices. Did they just have the one? Or did they have mourning?
Oh, you mean...
Cain and Abel.
Oh, so, yeah, it seems like this idea of offering sacrifice every day was only by the giving of the Torah on Mount Sinai. We do see, certainly, like you mentioned with Cain and Abel, Noah, others, that they, from time to time, will build an altar and offer sacrifice to God, but not in a form where they're doing it twice a day, every day, for their entire life. That's only a commandment from the Torah. All right. So the Ritzvah is going to try to help us understand why we need both. What's the fusion of the two opinions? So it says, the meaning of this is as follows. Certainly the patriarchs instituted the prayer, or the prayers, but on that basis alone, we would be under no obligation to follow their institution. The rabbis then came along and based the institution on the sacrificial rite so that it would be obligatory. So this is why we need both. Why it's not enough to have the earliest opinion, or the other patriarchs, is that it would be nice to know, and it's certainly worthwhile to emulate the behavior set forth by the patriarchs. But if it was only because Abraham, Yitzchak, and Yaakov did it, then we wouldn't have an obligation to pray today. But by basing it on something which is a mitzvah from the Torah, that gives it a greater strength, a strength like an obligation. Now, I want you to keep this concept of an obligation in your mind also, because we're going to see that's not so simple either. It is, in fact, the biblical obligation to pray is not so simple. And in fact, if you're coming to the Shabbos morning classes, like you two, you know that it's not a biblical obligation. So we've been talking about for like the last 3 months is why is it not a mitzvah from the Torah to pray? Now, all right, so we have this answer. It's in order to give us the strength of an obligation. So here, then we go back the other way. If basing it on the sacrifices is what gives it the strength of an obligation, then we can just ask, why do we need both the other way? Why do we need the patriarchs? What are they giving us? So the next opinion, or the next text rather, text number 5, is from the Medrash, and it says, Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi said, the first fathers instituted the 3 prayers. Okay, so now that I told you to keep all the names in mind, what jumps out from the slide now over here? Something should be screaming from the slide to grab your attention.
Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi?
It usually would say the patriarchs, and why it says the first fathers.
Okay, that's a good one. That's not what I was looking for.
Oh, okay.
But that's
Is it just the 3 prayers? The type of prayers?
The last comment he said was the prayers were instituted to replace the daily sacrifices.
And who's he?
And that's Yeshua ben Levi.
Ah, So in the Gemara, Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi is arguing with Rabbi Yossi ben Chanina about the basis of prayer. Where does it come from? So here we see Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi, our disputant in the Talmud, is saying the opinion of Rabbi Yossi, but he's saying it as his opinion.
Yeah. Right.
So here, what we say is like the same author in the Gemara of the opinion that the reason we use the sacrifice in order to give it the strength of an obligation of a mitzvah, he himself also says it's from the patriarchs, which means there's no argument in the first place.
He's saying both, in effect, tied together, that they're not two different things.
Right.
The same thing.
The Gemara in text 2c is trying to reconcile on behalf of Rabbi Yossi ben Chanina, because he's now had an attack almost, it seems like, when we're looking at it. When we take the either-or mindset, then we think that Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi is attacking Rabbi Yossi, and he has to make up an answer for him. But here from the Medrash we see that this is an attack because Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi has the same opinion.
Now here on the going back to the 2b, he also said it replaced the daily sacrifices.
Right.
And he said, well, yeah, they did it, but they didn't do it to replace it.
Yeah, because he's not even talking about the sacrifices here.
Right.
He's saying the reason is because our forefathers did this. So there's this interplay. There's this complementary interplay between the forefathers and the sacrifices. So the question is, like, let's go back now to the forefathers. Now, the forefathers, they're the ones who established these prayers. Now, when we say prayer, when we say tefillah, a lot of times what tefillah is used as is a synonym for the amidah, the standing prayer, right? Now, one thing which you'll notice as a 3 times a day prayer, all right, is prayer like a noun?
Yeah.
Okay.
Prayer, rather.
Yeah,
prayer.
not prayer, a prayer. Is that one who prays?
Right, prayer.
3 times a day. So the amidah, the standing prayer, is the same. Shacharis mincha marv. So you might think, well, if tefillah and amidah are the same thing, they're synonymous in Jewish literature, then what do we mean that Abraham is establishing one and Yitzchak is establishing the other and Yaakov is establishing a third? They're all the same thing. So the different times, which we're soon going to see, Shacharis mincha marv, and the different founders, Abraham, Yitzchak, and Yaakov, the fact that it's going step by step and being developed by the forefathers is, in fact, because each one of the prayers is a different theme, it's a different idea, it's a different type of prayer. Now, again, in practice, what we have now with our liturgy, with the amidah and the words that we say, it's all the same, Shacharis mincha marv. But once we understand where they're coming from, we're going to see that there are, in fact, 3 different themes altogether, 3 different ideas altogether. Now, these 3 different themes, these 3 different ideas, this development, what is the symbolic association to patriarchs? That's what we're going to try to figure out here tonight. If even according to the author of the opinion that it's not the avos, right? In the Gemara, he's saying it's because of the sacrifices. But here, the same opinion, the same author is saying it's because of the forefathers. So what is the connection, what's the associative connection of Abraham to Shacharis, and Yitzchak to Mincha, and Yaakov to Marv? That's what we're going to try to see next. In order to understand this associative connection, we're going to now introduce one more layer of knowledge, one more layer of insight to prayer, which is like the legal approach, the halachic approach, the halachic status of all the different prayers. All right, any questions so far about what we've laid out? Any questions from home? Your chance to give me an orange bubble on the screen. All right, no questions. Okay, so I told you before that we have a question about the obligation for prayer, whether or not what's the source for the obligation to pray. So if you had any hard time keeping Rabbi Yossi and Rabbi Yeshua straight in your head, now it's going to get even more complicated because I have a Rambam and a Ramban. So that's also hard to keep straight who is who. And it's not like translating it into like the English version is any easier because it's Maimonides or Nachmanides, and they sound pretty close that way also. So we're going to see there's a dispute between Rambam and the Ramban about the obligation to pray altogether. What is the source of the obligation to pray? Now, the next text number, actually, I have this, this is where we're headed. The patriarchs didn't just give us the times to pray, but they also gave us a type of prayer. Each new stage of the development from Abraham to Yitzchak to Yaakov is a whole different type of prayer. So we're going to try to understand what is this association of the patriarchs to the prayer. All right, so the next text number 6, is Maimonides, again from the Mishnah Torah. Here, the very first chapter, the very first halacha, to give us the general mitzvah of this and his opening laws of prayer. It says it is a positive Torah commandment to pray every day. All right, so I'm going to use two terms. There's what's called a biblical commandment and a rabbinic commandment. Now in Hebrew, like the yeshivish Hebrew, we call it midoraisa, means it's from the Torah, it's from the Bible, or midorabanan, it's from the rabbis. So what we have in this very first statement in text 6 is a powerful assertion. Maimonides is saying it is a biblical commandment to pray every day. How do we know that? Because the verse says, "You shall serve God, your God." That's a verse in the book of Exodus, book of Shmos. The tradition teaches us, how does that mean? I have to pray every day. Maimonides, come on, what does that mean? I should serve God, your God? Well, that could mean put on, do any other manner of things. How does that mean prayer? So tradition teaches us that this service is prayer. As it is stated in the book of Devarim, the book of Deuteronomy, and serve him with all your heart. Still, how do we know that's prayer? Because our sages have interpreted that statement, serve God with your heart, by asking the question, which is the service of the heart? What does it mean to serve God with your heart? And the sages answer, that's prayer. So serve God, that you do every day. Serve God with your heart, what is that? Prayer. Therefore, we see there's a biblical, from connecting the dots, Maimonides is explaining to us that we have a biblical commandment to pray every day. The number of prayers, Maimonides clarifies, is not prescribed in the Torah, nor does it prescribe a specific formula for prayer. Also, according to Torah law, there are no fixed times for prayers. So all this that we just talked about in the first part of that class, Shachas Mincha Maariv, and giving them names, and the Amida, which I spoke about a few minutes ago, Maimonides is explaining all of that is rabbinic in nature. The general mitzvah to pray every day, that's biblical. So he's making a distinction between prayer in general and all the specifics that we attach to it. That's rabbinic. Now, Nachmanides, Ramban, he argues with this position. And his assertion is that prayer altogether is just not a mitzvah from the Torah. The whole concept is a rabbinic institution. So that's the next text. Nachmanides say for mitzvahs of the Rambam. He's coming to challenge the Rambam directly in the Rambam's own book. And he says, certainly the entire matter of prayer is not a biblical obligation at all. Rather, it is a feature of the blessed Creator's kindness towards us that he hears and answers whenever we call out to him, but we have no obligation from the Torah to do it. Now, let me take a second to talk about this. When we talk about different levels of obligation. So you could ask, well, what's the difference? We're going to pray anyways, right? Rabbis, Torah, what's the difference? So one difference is what's called a suffix, a doubt. Okay, so let me paint a picture, right? Let's say that you're going to pray the afternoon service. You're at work. This is a situation I've encountered more than once. Actually, this happened to me this week. There was no way I was going to make it away from work before the sun went down, especially in the winter. And now here in Michigan, right? It's 4 o'clock, 4:30, and you have to have a mincha, and so it's not time to leave work yet. And so what am I going to do? So I got to find some corner or some closet or some bathroom break that I'm going to go and pray, and no one's going to miss me. And then I'll come back and continue working. So you're going to daven mincha. So imagine now, as you're on your way, you're kind of trying to find the room over there, and someone sees you in the hall and has a question and calls you to a meeting, and you're like, oh man, I needed to daven mincha, but I got pulled away. So then you get out of there, and it's still time to daven mincha. So you're looking around, looking to find the place to daven, and right as you're about to daven, you get a phone call, and it goes on and on like this. And you went to daven, you even took your sitter out, and you got started, and this interruption, that interruption comes like towards the end of the day, and you're like thinking to yourself, wait, did I daven mincha or not? You can imagine, right? I tried a bunch of times. I can't really remember now. Did I daven mincha or not? I feel like I davened. I certainly tried. Did I daven or not? This is called a suffix, a doubt. So if you have a doubt, if you did it or not, and what's going to happen, if you did, let's say, in this case of a doubt, you did do it, but you can't remember if you did it or not. If you have a doubt and you did it, then saying God's name and all the blessings again for no reason, no obligation, would be wrong, as we talked about last week's class. But if you didn't, and it's an obligation, then you should cover it, right? So that we make a difference. If the Torah is the source for the obligation, so if it's a suffix doiraiso, if it's a doubt from a biblical commandment, then we are strict. And if it's a doubt from a rabbinic decree, then we're lenient.
Okay.
So it will make a difference in the case of a doubt whether you pray again just to be sure or not. So we have this dispute. Maimonides, Nachmanides, is it a biblical commandment or not? Now, here, besides not knowing the source halachically, if it's from the Torah or from the rabbis, now we're going to see there's even different levels of obligation. However we resolve this matter between Maimonides and Nachmanides, then we see there's a difference in halachic status between the various daily prayers. So the idea is like this. Mincha, Shacharis and Mincha, the morning prayers and the afternoon prayers, they have let's call it a higher level of obligation. Where the evening prayers, Mariv, could be stated as it's almost like it's optional. So that's the next text, Maimonides, Laws of Prayer, the first chapter, the 6th halacha there, it says, the evening prayer is not obligatory, as are the morning and afternoon prayers. Nevertheless, the Jewish people in all the places that they have settled are accustomed to recite the evening prayer and have been accepted upon themselves as an obligatory prayer. So what we saw from the first part of tonight's class is that there's somewhat of an obvious logic to this, according to the opinion of Yeshua ben Levi, that the sacrifices are the source for the mitzvah of prayer. What's the obvious logic? The Shacharis corresponds to what?
The morning sacrifice.
Good.
Right?
Yeah.
The afternoon.
Mincha corresponds to?
The midday sacrifice.
Midday sacrifice. What does Marav correspond to?
Well, if it's evening sacrifice, but it said before they could be any time during the evening, so obviously there's flexibility there.
Right, and there's not even really a sacrifice we're dealing with here. We're just burning all the parts.
Right.
We're kind of clearing the deck. So there's not a sacrifice that it corresponds to. So Shacharis and Mincha, according to that logic, that makes sense that you should do it. It's a higher level of obligation. Marav, since there's not really a sacrifice attached to it, it's just kind of clearing off all the extra parts, that makes it less of an obligation. So we see in the halachic approach that there is a distinction halachically between Shacharis and Mincha and then Marav. So if now, one second, and we'll come to your question. I'm gonna come right back to you. So now the question is, after we already integrated the thinking, sacrifices and patriarchs, they're together. Even Rabbi Shua ben Levi says they're together. He authors both opinions. So if we're going to make this distinction between Shachris, Mincha, Maariv based on the sacrifices, why should Yaakov's prayer be any different than Abraham and Yitzchak's? Meaning the first opinion, which is, forget about the sacrifices. The reason why we pray is because of Abraham, Yitzchak, and Yaakov. But it's not either or. It's integrated. So if it's integrated, then why should Yaakov's prayer be any different? That's like adding a new layer to the question. A new layer to the insight about prayer is, if we've already put the two together, the patriarchs and the sacrifices, but when we look at just from the perspective of the sacrifices, it brings a logical distinction between Mincha, Shachris and Mincha and Maariv. So going to the first opinion, why should Yaakov be different? Okay, now I have to come back to your question.
Doesn't almost every synagogue has Mincha and Maariv at the same, like immediately after each other?
Yeah.
But they don't have to be.
They don't have to be.
That's just
Convenient, because it makes people have to come to shul twice instead of 3 times.
And also, when you say like Maariv or any of the morning, afternoon, or evening, is the only time you need a minyan if you're saying Kaddish?
No.
Because you were saying you were looking for a room to say it.
Yeah,
why would you not need a minyan?
Well, because if you don't have a minyan, you still need to pray.
Mm-hmm.
So it's always better to daven with the minyan. And so you have what's called a davar shebekdusha, a matter of holiness. So matters of holiness should be always preferable to do them with a quorum.
But for sure, if you're saying Kaddish.
Yeah, if you don't, for absolutely, you can't say Kaddish without a minyan. But that's the Kaddish is an example of something which is called davar shebekdusha, a matter of holiness.
Mm-hmm.
But prayer, if you miss out on davar shebekdusha, you shouldn't also miss the mitzvah of prayer. Okay, now one more layer to the question. So this layer is, how does the Jewish calendar work? So in chronological order of our patriarchs, who's first? Abraham, right? So Abraham, and then Yitzchak, and then Yaakov. What we've established here in the prayers is that Shachris corresponds to Abraham. So if you think about prayer as a linear thing, which prayer is first? Shachris, because Abraham's first. But the Jewish calendar doesn't work that way. We see from the 6 days of creation that it was night and it was day and day 1. So the Jewish tradition is that days start with nightfall. And then we progress into the day, which is like the second half of the day, and then a new day starts again with the next night. So the way that our calendar works, you would think that the first prayer would be Maariv. So if the first prayer should be Maariv according to the way the calendar works, then really Abraham should be the founder of Maariv. Yeah. And Yaakov should be Mincha. Right? It should be Abraham is Maariv, Yitzchak is Shachris, and then Yaakov should be Mincha. So why does the order go different? Meaning we've integrated already that the forefathers and the sacrifices are together, but that doesn't fit with how the day works. All right. You guys are on the edge of your seat, all these layers and all these things to think about, what's going on. So in order to answer all the outstanding questions right now what we're going to do is take what's called a Hasidic twist. We're going to take a turn into a Hasidic way of thinking about prayer. Now, the idea what I mean by this is that we're going to take a look at the context of when the prayers took place for the patriarchs. Meaning, what's going on in Abraham's story? What's going on in Yitzchak's story? What's going on in Yaakov's story when they pray? And by taking a look at the context, the narrative context, we'll be able to understand what is this association? What is the symbolic meaning of each prayer? And once we uncover the context and the symbolic meaning, that will help us answer the outstanding questions so far from tonight's class. But before I go and answer our questions, I'm going to ask you if you have any questions. Nothing? Clear?
So far.
All right.
We're hanging in there.
Okay, good. So, the next text. So, let's talk about this. So, the Avos, it says we do not have forefathers except for three. It's an English translation of a rabbinic expression that we only call three people our forefathers, meaning Abraham, Yitzchak, and Yaakov. But after Yaakov, there's the 12 tribes, right? And that's when we already start to split. Now, part of what this means, the expression, we only have three patriarchs, is that the patriarchs have a certain, they're universal to each and every one of us. Now, they're different. Each one of them are different. They're fundamentally different. But when we understand all of them together, when we call them our patriarchs, it's because each difference among them is something that we find collectively within our own lives, within our own experience. Contrast that to the children of Yaakov, right? Let's give an example. We have the concept of Yisachar and Zvulun. You guys have heard of the partnership of Yisachar and Zvulun? So Yisachar and Zvulun were brothers, and they were given a partnership in the land of Israel. One tribe was responsible to learn and to figure out matters of Jewish law, like the calendar.
And the other support them.
And the other ones were blessed with abundance. They were given the port city in the land of Israel, and they were blessed to be successful merchants. So they should make enough money to support their own tribe as well as the tribe of their brother. Now, but what we see from that is there are very distinct roles between Yisachar and Zvulun. And not necessarily does everyone have to be both. You don't have to be a Yisachar and a Zvulun. You might just only be a Yisachar or a Zvulun. How that would translate nowadays is you might be sufficient to learn one thing in the morning and one thing at night and spend most of your time working, as long as you're working in a way to support holy things. Whereas a whole different way of living your life might be to learn all the time and work very minimally. Now, that just shows it's not universal, the tribes. But Abraham, Yitzchak, and Yaakov, what they represent, even though they're fundamentally different, each of them collectively represent something that we all can find in our own lives. Now, Abraham as the first of the patriarchs, what's going on when he prays? The Talmud, quotes his story that he got up in the morning and he stood, and that standing means prayer. What's happening in the story? Now, first, Abraham is a very successful person in all ways, right? He's the founder of a movement. He's the founder of monotheism. And he has a tremendous following. And his idea is revolutionary. And he's successful in defeating opposition to his idea. He's a compelling leader. He has physical success. He's very wealthy. He's blessed with insight. That's the next text over here. It says that Rabbi Elazar the Modaite said that Abraham possessed a power of reading the stars, for which he was much sought after by the kings of the east and the west to take advice from him. So Abraham was a brilliant person, not just a founder or charismatic founder of a movement that had adherents, and that he was a compelling leader who could defeat his opposition, but he had worldly knowledge, which was sought after. He was a wise person. He was successful in really all ways. Now, something was missing. What was missing?
Children.
Children. Abraham was the founder of a movement that it looked like would stop with him. There was no continuity to his movement without a child, without a family. But God promised him that he would have these children. When God comes to bless Abraham with children, there's a brief interruption about the destruction of Sodom and Gomorrah.
Mm-hmm.
But then when we return back to Abraham, we see that this verse that is the source for Abraham's prayer takes place. Abraham finally got the blessing that he'd been missing all this time. Wildly successful in his own personal life, but now the blessing of children, the blessing of descendants, the blessing of continuity of the message, that is when Abraham stops to pray. So this context of Abraham's prayer is a context where Abraham is expressing gratitude. Now, so let's think about this context, think about the symbolic meaning and the association of Abraham to us, because he's our forefather. What is it? What's the universal message to us? Abraham's praying in the morning, which signifies a beginning, a new beginning. When you wake up in the morning, you have a new day. It's just opportunity in front of you. So when we're blessed with a new day, a new beginning, a new start in something, then the prayer of Abraham teaches us to express the same gratitude. The theme of Abraham's prayer is a theme of gratitude.
Even though the day begins at sundown.
Yeah, so that's a standing question.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, that's a standing question. Yeah, it's a good question, but I asked it first. No, I'm just joking. But it's a good question because you're right on the right track. Now, so Abraham is teaching us to pray during good times, during times of hope, and to express gratitude at the beginning of a new undertaking, a new day. Now, so that's Abraham. So if we look at Yitzchak in the context of his prayer, so Yitzchak is this blessing. He's the answer to Abraham's prayers. He's the answer to the blessing. He is the descendant of Abraham. So Abraham is the founder of this movement, and Yitzchak is the next generation. Now, the next generation means, if we think about it, the same kind of theme, is that if the morning is the beginning of something new, and we express hope and gratitude for something new, Yitzchak is the middle. He is the transition from beginning to, like, we're implementing the big idea. Abraham started this movement. Yitzchak is the implementation, the continuity of the movement. Now, the next text is a fascinating text. It says, it came to pass after Abraham's death that God blessed his son Yitzchak. And Yitzchak dwelt near Be'er L'chai Roi. Okay, so something, again, jumps off the screen here. How did I start the class? So I'm reviewing what happened to Yaakov, right? Yaakov's in big trouble right now. Esav wants to kill him. Why does Esav want to kill him? Because Yitzchak blessed Yaakov instead of Esav. Before he passed away, he thinks he's going to pass away. Time to bless my son. Now, if we fast forward to the Yaakov story, before Yaakov passes away, what does he do? He blesses his son. So wait a second. Who blesses Yitzchak? God. If you go through the story, you flip through the pages, you look around, there's no story of Abraham blessing Yitzchak.
Right.
What's going on? Why not? So Rashi in the next text explains what's going on. Because this is not what we would expect. Abraham is ish chesed, he's a giver. We would expect there to be this big, effusive prayer and blessing from Abraham to his son Yitzchak, but it's quiet. Yitzchak blesses Yaakov, Yaakov blesses his kids, Abraham nothing. So Rashi points out, now it came to pass after Abraham's death that God blessed, ... Rashi says, even though the Holy and Blessed be He delivered blessings to Abraham, Abraham was afraid to bless Yitzchak because he foresaw Esav emanating from him. So he said, may the master of blessings come and bless whoever he pleases. And the only blessing he came and blessed him. Okay, so let's talk about that, what that means. Abraham looked at his son, and remember, what is Abraham's big blessing from God? Here he started this movement. There's going to be continuity. If we're going to implement, there's going to be descendants. It's going to be my legacy. But wait a second. He looks into the future and sees his son is going to have two sons going in opposite directions. There's a doubt. Maybe my descendants is not going to work out so great. It's just my own grandson is going to go off the path. So let's leave it to God to bless this, because I'm not so sure this is going to work out. So this is a message to us. When a new day starts, you can take that as metaphorically as you want, it could be very literal, or, a metaphorical concept of a brand new day, a new beginning. We express gratitude, we express thanks, we express hope. Yitzchak's right in the middle of things. The fact that Abraham withheld his blessing from Yitzchak is this doubt. When you're in the middle of your day, you already got things started. Okay, fine, when you woke up, things are brand new. It's time to be excited, time to be hopeful. But now you're got in the middle of it. Wait a second, now it's getting a little difficult. I'm not so sure how this is going to turn out. So that's a theme. What happens? What's the context of Yitzchak's prayer? Yitzchak, when we find him in prayer, it's when he is about to get married to Rivka. When Yitzchak is out meditating in the field, as the verse says, he's doing that right before Rivka comes with Eliezer to get married. So this, again, is in the middle of things. They're making their family. It's the middle of the day. It's the middle of the effort. It's the middle of a movement. There's doubt. There's a question how it's going to go. We're making progress, but we're not sure how it's going to turn out. So what Yitzchak's prayer represents is that when they're in the middle of things, when we encounter doubt, when we have anxiety about how things are going to turn out, we pray to God for clarity. So Abraham represents gratitude and hope and thanks. Yitzchak represents turning to God for clarity in the face of doubt, face of anxiety. That's the contextual theme of Yitzchak's prayer. So now he comes to Yaakov. Yaakov, as we already started tonight's class, his life is difficult. His life is hard, right? What's so hard about Yaakov's life? Yaakov is born fighting with a brother. And he's raised fighting with a brother. He's running for his life away from his brother. When he runs away from, what do you call it, out of the frying pan and into the fire. He's running away from Esav, and only to fall into the lap of Lavan, who is no simple character to deal with. Then he gets tricked by Lavan and has to marry the wrong woman, and works extra long for the one who he wants to get married to. And his wife, Rachel, dies, giving birth to his youngest son. His daughter is kidnapped and violated. His favorite son is kidnapped and sold into slavery, and they're separate from each other for years on end. Before he dies, he has to go into exile, into Egypt, because of a famine. When he finally comes to Paro and says, you know what, my years have been short and hard. This is a verse in the Torah itself. Yaakov's life represents challenge, struggle. Even when he gets his name, Yisroel is interpreted that he wrestled with God. He struggled his whole life and prevailed in the face of this struggle. So Yaakov's life, Yaakov's theme is fitting with darkness, nighttime. If morning, Abraham represents something new and fresh, and we're thankful and we're showing gratitude for this, Yaakov's is dark. Yaakov's is a struggle. Yaakov's is a challenge, his life. And what's the context in the narrative of his prayer. The context of his prayer is he's running away. He's leaving Israel to go to a foreign land. He's leaving the holiness of Israel to go to a foreign place. This is struggle. So Yaakov's, when he stops to pray, it's in a time of darkness, in a time of struggle. That's the context which it represents to us, the theme of why we pray. So the next text we see, text 11, is the Or Chaim, which he says that the Yaakov story is a universal story. It's our story as well. In an allegorical sense, this entire chapter, Yaakov's prayer, alludes to the matter of mankind. Our sages first said of the verse, and Yaakov departed from Beersheba and went to Haran, Vayetze Yaakov, that's the beginning of his parsha, that this departure alludes to the soul's departure from the upper world. The name Yaakov itself is an allusion to the evil inclination that is bound to man's heel, bound to his akev from the moment of his birth. They have said that Beersheba is a reference to the place from which the souls emerge, which is a compound word, right? First is Be'er, the well of living water, and Sheva alludes to the oath, the Shavua that the soul makes with God as it emerges, not to violate the words of Torah. It says that he encountered that place, which is a reference to prayer, because man must pray to God, the omnipresent, who is the place of the world. We have to pray to God that he does not leave us. It continues to say, and he lodged there, for the sun had set, because one must conduct himself in this manner of active service until his sun sets. As the sages have said, do not rely on yourself until the day you die. So after all of these conditions, one can be confident that he will defeat the evil inclination. And now Scripture informs the reader that he can be worthy of an offshoot of prophecy, and that God will reveal himself to him and speak to him in a dream, as he did with Yaakov. So Yaakov's journey, the Or Chaim is explaining, resembles the journey that every soul makes. That we're going from the highest of heights, the well of souls, and we come down into this mundane and physical and dark world. We have to make our way through life. And there's going to be struggle. There's going to be difficulty. And throughout all the struggle, whatever that struggle is, right? Wherever you're at, it's like, I'm looking forward to when things are going to be easier, or I'm looking back to when things are easier. It's like, even little kids whose life seems easy, right? You can remember, like, I can't wait till I'm an adult. I can make decisions for myself, and no one's going to tell me what to do. I can't wait till I'm an adult. And then you're an adult, like, wow, I wish I was a kid again. It was so much easier, And then you're in the middle of the struggle. Maybe you outgrew this longing to be a kid again, but you're like, things are really hard right now. I can't wait till I'm all set when I'm older, It's like we're in the middle of a struggle, no matter when it is.
Listening to the story, I could see Abraham and our parents, because maybe they don't know how much education, my generation may have needed.
Right.
But they, okay, so may the Lord bless you.
Right.
Because there's so much to look forward to. And then my generation, we were comfortable. We, quote, had it made.
Yeah.
Because we were able to get into the jobs, invent the calculators, invent the, the computers and all this other good stuff. And now the kids come along, well, where are you going to find a job? We have jobs, but not enough people skilled, to do the work.
Right.
So it's going to be hard for them.
Right. So that's the struggle of Yaakov, you're saying. Yeah. So Yaakov, if we think of Yaakov now symbolically, we think about the context of the struggle and darkness and nighttime. When he goes into the struggle, what does he do? He prays. What's he praying for? Abraham prayed to give thanks as an expression of gratitude. Yitzchak prayed for clarity. In the face of doubt, in the face of confusion, in the face of transition, he prayed for clarity. There's still like a hopefulness in that prayer. What is Yaakov praying for? So Yaakov is praying to overcome challenges. to overcome the darkness of night, to light up the darkness. Now, what he's asking for is the strength to overcome challenges. So where does that strength come from? Now again, what are our questions? Our questions are, why is Yaakov's prayer different than Avraham and Yitzchak's, and it's obligatory or not? Why is the order different? We have a few questions outstanding now. So when we think about it from this symbolic perspective, when we get to this layer of meaning, now that we have an understanding like Yaakov's prayer and night is symbolic of struggle, and Yaakov is turning to relief in the face of struggle, where does that relief come from? So Chassidus explains that relief, where he's turning to, is within. What Yaakov, the nature of Yaakov's prayer is to find the strength from within in order to overcome the struggles. Avraham is saying thanks. That's an external expression. Yitzchak is looking for clarity. Again, that's from the outside. Yaakov is looking for solution. Now, that could be on the outside. You could make a compelling reason why that is also looking outwards from the prayer. But what we're going to see in the next text is Chassidus explains the strength to overcome the challenges that night represents, that comes from within.
So this is the night. This is where the morning is, when you are mourning. And then Abraham is when you give the gratitude, like joy comes in the morning.
Yeah, at the beginning, exactly. The hope and gratitude is the beginning of something new. So let's see the next text. Text 12 is from the Sichos, is from the Lubavitcher Rebbe. In this week's Parsha, he's explaining one of the characteristics of teshuvah, of repentance, is that repentance and returning to God bring out the power of the bond that a Jew shares with God. We have this essential bond of the merit of our soul that's essentially bound up with godliness. And that's what it means, tshuva. It is because this connection can never be lost. It can't even be lost by sin, that one can always perform teshuvah and return to God, even after committing a sin, God forbid, heaven forbid. So it is with the tshuva that the soul must accomplish when it descends below. Right? That's what the Or Chaim was saying. The Or Chaim was saying that the Yaakov story is our story. Yaakov goes out from Beersheba to Haran. That's the story of our soul leaving heaven and coming down here on earth. So this, what we have to accomplish, we have to accomplish tshuva. What's Yaakov praying for in the face of challenge? He's praying for this bond. Through it, the soul's powerful bond with God becomes manifest, such that even when it is clothed inside a body and the animal soul and the evil inclination and all the struggles that's inherent in that situation, it can remain connected with God in its service of the divine. The soul, what the Rebbe is explaining, the soul is bound to godliness. And it's this connection to infinite God is our internal source of strength to overcome our challenges. Even the most difficult challenges, like what Yaakov's life represents, in the context of the prayer, even the most difficult challenges can be overcome. But what's the strength to overcome it? It's our bond with God that's within each and every one of us. So Abraham's saying thanks. Yitzchak looking for clarity. Yaakov is turning within. He's looking to that bond, that essential bond of the soul to God.
So he's looking for a lifeline, but the lifeline is inside, not external.
Exactly. Now, the final, so we have the three models so far. So we have sunrise, that's the morning. Abraham is giving thanks. We have the shadows of the afternoon, that's Yitzchak. Yitzchak sees trouble. That's why Abraham doesn't bless him, because there might be some trouble over here. So we're looking for strength, for clarity, for certainty. Nighttime, that's Yaakov. That's struggle. All right. The final text for tonight, text 13, is from the Medrash. It says, and lay down in that place. Yaakov is laying down in that place. Rabbi Yehuda and Rabbi Nehemiah both understand this verse to imply an inverse proposition. Rabbi Yehuda says, he laid down in that place, but for the entire 14 years that he spent hiding in yeshiva, studying in the house of Aver, he did not lie down to sleep. So before Yaakov gets to this point, he went and took a 14-year vacation. Some vacation, he didn't lay down to sleep. But he took 14 years of strength in learning Torah. And he never went, this is what a serious student was, he never went to bed during those 14 years. This is the first time he lay down to sleep in a long time. Rabbi Nehemiah said that he lay here, but for the next 20 years, when he's going to Lavan's house, he did not lie down. He's working so hard for Lavan, he didn't lay down to go to sleep there either. And what would he say throughout his stay in Lavan's house? Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi said, that's the name for that's familiar, right? He would recite the 15 Psalms of the book of Tehillim, chapters 120 through 134, beginning with the words of a song of ascents. Now, what is his reason for proposing this? Why is Yeshua ben Levi saying this is what he said? Because of the opening lines of Psalm 124. Shir HaMalos, the song of ascents from David. Were it not for God who is on our side, let Israel now declare. And Israel, in that verse, which is from King David, is referring to Israel, to Yaakov. Yeshua ben Levi is saying that what was Yaakov busy with in the house of Lavan? He's praying nonstop. And the theme of these 15 chapters is how the salvation, we're praying for salvation in the face of struggle. Now, here it seems like the question is even stronger. Again, so if this is the essential bond of the soul with God, why should this be last? Why should this be optional? Why do we break the order for this to happen? So what Chassidus explains is that you can command someone, you can oblige someone to say thank you. Because thank you is something which is external. You're saying thank you to someone else. You can even oblige someone, you can command them to seek guidance, seek clarity, like Yitzchak. When it comes to the type of prayer that Yaakov is doing, Yaakov is finding the strength to overcome the challenges from within by reaching the essence of his soul and how it's bound up with God. That, Chassidus explains, you can't oblige someone to do. That a person can only do on their own. So when we say that Mariv is optional and different than Shachar and Mincha, it's because you can't tell someone to find their essence. They have to get there on their own. This is the prayer of Yaakov. A person who does it on their own, a person can't be told to do this. Expressing their own identity, their own essence, that's what Mariv is all about. That's what this last prayer is all about. So from Yaakov, we learned that when things are difficult, things are a struggle, when life is hard, we don't know where to start. We don't know who to ask for help. So it's the bond with God that's within each and every one of us. We have to turn within and find that strength. That's the idea over here. And so the prayer that we say over there is that we should have the strength to pray. We should hear the lessons from this layout. And then, God willing, God should hear our prayers. And we should be successful in finding that essential bond between the soul and God. All right.
It's interesting that the last piece reminds probably all of us, if you think that could be the Wizard of Oz.
Yeah.
The last scene where it's, no one can tell you. You have to discover it on your own. You have to discover where you are from, what your foundation is on your own. No one can tell you that.
Right.
Similar to that.
Yeah.
Because that's what happens when some of your script writers are Jewish.
When they prayed before. Yeah. All right. So the summary. So the song is the song of yourself. So the prayer of Yaakov is an inner prayer. It's finding the infinite bond of the soul to God. And this is like we saw in 12. This is the power of tshuva. And the reason it's not obligatory is we're reaching within. We're reaching the essence, and that you can't command someone to do. It has to come from yourself. All right.
Could you go back 2 slides to where it referred to the Psalms that he was going back through?
Yeah. Oh, here.
That was it. Okay. So, Rabbi Levy would recite the 15th because I was saying it sort of sounded like it was out of reverse order.
No, Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi is saying this is what Yaakov said.
If he was saying what confused me there was the Song of Ascents from David.
Right.
How could he be reciting the Song of Ascents from David?
Good question.
David came later on.
Good question. So David wrote Psalms prophetically.
Right.
Meaning that Yaakov said it first.
Got it.
But then David collected what Yaakov said and put it into the book.
Okay, that makes more sense.
You see a lot of the same thing a lot of times where it says these are the prayers from the sons of Korah.
Right.
So David was collecting prayers from throughout history and putting them into the book of Psalms.
Okay, that makes sense.
I have a question too.
Yeah.
Go back to text 3:8 when you talk about the sciatic nerve.
Yeah.
Like you said, when Shabbos you were talking about the 248 mitzvahs.
Yeah.
And how it relates to the body part. So he was prohibited against eating, even though that's part of the nervous system.
Yeah.
And not a body part. Is that one of the prohibit? I don't know.
Yeah, it is one of the prohibitions, but not. But the 248 is the limbs, which is the positive component.
Okay.
The 365 actually has to do with the nerves and the blood and the circulatory system.
Okay.
Now, this sciatic nerve prohibition is connected to the story of Yaakov when he's wrestling with the angel, and then it touches him on the leg and like cripples him in his leg. That touch is in the spot where the sciatic nerve is.
Why didn't it say like the hand or the arm or why the leg or the ear?
That's a good question. I mean, why the leg?
Yeah, why that?
So it has to do with the idea of Yaakov, the foot and the basis and the.
Oh, okay, the heel.
Yeah.
It's interesting. This is great.
Are there any other questions?
Yeah.
Go ahead.
On the announcement, it says it teaches you how to ask God at a time you don't even know what to ask